Rabbit came up short, panting heavily, not knowing what to do. His first instinct was to run and get help. Did Timmy get electrocuted, lassie? Did he, girl? But the wraith-chilling words, "kill me," finally registered in his head, and he realized that he wouldn't want to be rescued and kept alive if they swapped places. He played the sight back in his mind, trying to see it clearly from a distance, and he was startled to realize that the guy was naked. Guy, girl, he wasn't sure which. He didn't see a hoo-hoo dilly, but then again he didn't really see breasts either. He saw an ass and stared at it in his mind's eye for a moment. It could have been either, man or woman. But naked? In a substation? Whoever it was, it tried to commit suicide, he was certain, because for some reason people like to knock themselves off in the buff. He knew because he'd found himself naked and still alive before, hung over out in the woods and crusty with dried blood. This was after Annabella had been killed. Strange days. He remembered it being an act of defiance somehow, exposing himself outdoors, exposing the small penis he'd always been ashamed of, and not some kind of sexual thing. He just couldn't explain it. But he knew that sometimes people killed themselves naked, and whoever that poor soul back there was, they were naked, so he or she must have tried to die back there, and it didn't work. And now, whoever it was desperate, because now it was too late, but not too late enough, because they weren't dead, and it was far too late to change their mind. Like the guy who jumps off the roof and only breaks his back, then has to live 30 more years in a wheelchair that he can only move by blowing through a tube. Like the guy who tries to blow his brains out and misses, putting the gun to his temple instead of over his ear or in his mouth, and only blinds himself. Rabbit swallowed hard. The Good Samaritan isn't the guy who calls an ambulance and saves John Q. Suicide's life. He's the guy who puts him out of his misery. He turned back around and started running. Gwyn moved from one knot of people in the darkness to another, listening to them talk, piecing together what may or may not have happened. They would all find out over the next several days that it had been a person, their identity withheld, committing suicide at the substation nearby, who had misdirected massive amounts of electricity, 1.21 gigawatts or something like that, and caused the city-wide blackout. Pictures of the steel plate would be shown in the newspapers with 2 handprints burned into it, and also of the ring suspended above it with 8 black fingerprints where the person had grabbed a hold and completed the circuit. Reporters assured the public that death had been instantaneous, and many grumbled that they wish it hadn't been. They wished upon her all the pain in the world from the inconvenience she had caused. Far as Rabbit knew, death should have been instantaneous. There was absolutely no reason that this leathery-skinned thing he looked upon should be alive, but alive it was, and whimpering. It had definitely been a woman, and he could recognize her somewhat in the green of his night vision goggles. He sat down and slipped off a detachable heel of one of his shoes, taking out his broken-down syringe and snapping the pieces together. From the heel of the other shoe, he took one of the 4 small vials he had hidden there. Each one was there in preparation for a different contingency. Should some plan of his ever go wrong, the one he selected was full of heroin in liquid form for him to shoot himself up with if ever he was mortally wounded and preferred to overdose and check out more comfortably. It would be easier to break this poor thing's neck, he knew, but he would rather she end her life feeling immense bliss instead of horrible pain, and the high she would experience would be as close to heaven as he could get her. He hurriedly prepped the needle, slipping it gently into her arm, and pushed the plunger. A few seconds later, she tensed as the rapture came over her, and the wretched sight of her blurred as his eyes teared up. A short moment passed, and her breathing slowed, and her heart stopped. "I'm sorry, Nev," he said. "God, I'm so sorry." Megan stood outside in the street with her flashlight and hundreds of other people with their flashlights. She shined hers in the faces of people approaching, momentarily blinding them and making them curse her. Her body trembled as if stricken with an egg, and she kept her jaw clamped shut with fear that if she relaxed it for just an instant, she'd start screaming like a nutcase. Her fear was not unfounded, because a sob welled up inside of her that she had to keep swallowing. Black shapes kept pushing past her, bumping her backwards and forwards without either concern or apology, and terrifying her, giving her the unshakable feeling that she'd be knocked down and trampled to death by an uncaring crowd that wouldn't even know until daylight what they had done. A rapid succession of shoulders battering her head almost knocked her glasses off and made her lose her balance, and then it started. "Nicky!" she screamed. "Nick Caniglio! Nick!" Startled people came and tried to console her, but she recoiled from them and screamed louder, more desperately. Disaster voyeurs, the sick types of people who gather at crime scenes and the sites of horrible accidents, started to gravitate toward her, some only passively hoping to see blood, but all actively interested in the pain and misfortune of others. Gwyn went like many did, like cartoon people lured by a visible snake-like thread of fragrance, pulled along blindly. The 3 sex traffickers came at a run, not knowing what to think and not believing their luck. They all crowded around the frightened little girl, watching her have her nervous breakdown. Several of them had trained their camcorders on her, hoping there was enough candle power from their flashlights to get a good video, and the tiny red lights that meant recording hovered in the darkness around her like the laser scopes of sniper rifles. "Nick Caniglio!" "Jesus, honey, what is it?" someone called, and people turned to see the slim, dark shape come pushing its way through the crowd, occasionally mildly tasing people who didn't move quickly enough. Flashlight beams found their way to him, shining in his eyes and blinding him to make him grimace and curse, and when he beat his way to her side, the lights played on both sides of their faces. "What happened? You okay? What is it?" Nick, what are you... Christ, honey, let's get inside." He turned and snapped on the crowd pressing him and his lover. "What's the matter with you fucking people? Get your goddamn lights out of our faces!" Megan's frantic pawing at him made her hard to hold on to, and he had to hug her tightly to him with one arm while swinging his briefcase with the other arm to clear the way. She suddenly went still, though, looking straight into Gwyn Hutchinson's face, Nick Caniglio's supposed wife, all yellow and bright in the wash of the lights. "Nick Caniglio," Megan said again, just to see. "Honey, stop saying my name!" Rabbit snapped. Gwyn's eyes didn't show a flicker of recognition, not even of mild curiosity. The boy she'd known as Jared Layton looked entirely different as a grown man, and with what may have been blood matting her blonde hair down, she didn't look enough like the vixen he'd been hunting to catch his eye, especially considering what they'd just gone through and what they had on their minds. Not at all like a husband and wife, Megan thought, and she was suddenly very calm. While she didn't know what in the blue fuck was going on, she did know that what she was going to do about it. She cooperated from then on, no longer struggling, and went along with him as if she were a bell ram. They fought their way into the apartment building, oblivious of the 3 human traffickers following close behind.